Toi kong the jup viet noi dung nam ko vu hok hop tuk hoa han 6 bao luk nu vik ha guc nuoi kok bang motiku dam theo hong tau kem giak thoa man. Nu jung gwin chu de ve tsong ly, lam dung gwin luk va fan beat chung tok, toi ko the viet motifin ban dien on voi chow treo la vik vien consat by kong che hop fap, by din chi hok by lat te bang bang chung va nan chung, van ju dung nip ku, van fong va cam sup qua duan ma kong tun vin han 6 bao luk. 45 minutes before the courtroom erupted into stunned silence, the old Jefferson County Courthouse carried the familiar weight of another ordinary morning. Pale sunlight slipped through the towering windows, stretching across polished marble floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Lawyers hurried past one another with thick case files pressed against their chests. Deputies exchanged quiet words near the security checkpoint. Somewhere deeper inside the building, the sharp echo of a judge's gavel briefly cut through the steady hum of whispered conversations before fading into silence once again. No one standing in those long hallways imagined that before the morning was over, every assumption inside that courthouse would be challenged. Maya Carter stepped through the front entrance without drawing attention to herself. She wore a charcoal gray blazer over a simple white blouse, dark slacks, and low black heels polished to a quiet shine. Her tightly curled hair rested neatly against the back of her neck. No medals decorated her jacket. No military insignia hinted at years of service. Nothing about her appearance demanded recognition. She preferred it that way. The security officer barely glanced at her identification before waving her through the metal detector. Maya offered a polite nod and continued toward courtroom 3 with measured, unhurried steps. Her posture was straight, almost instinctive, the kind of posture that came from years of discipline rather than pride. Every movement reflected control. Every breath reflected patience. People often mistook that calmness for weakness. They always discovered the difference too late. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt unusually heavy. Rows of wooden benches were already filling with spectators hoping to witness another controversial hearing involving allegations of excessive force during a routine arrest months earlier. Reporters quietly prepared notebooks while camera operators adjusted equipment outside the courtroom doors, forbidden from filming once proceedings began. Maya paused near the last row before taking a seat by herself. She rested a plain leather folder across her lap. Inside were official documents requested by the court, documents connected to her scheduled testimony later that morning. She had traveled hundreds of miles to appear voluntarily, believing that justice deserved facts instead of assumptions. She had testified before military review boards. She had stood before commanding generals. She had faced hostile interrogations overseas where lives depended on every answer she gave. Yet somehow, this civilian courtroom carried a different kind of tension. Not because she feared speaking. Because she understood how quickly appearances could outweigh truth. Across the room, Officer Daniel Brooks leaned casually against a courtroom pillar, laughing with two fellow officers while adjusting the radio clip to his uniform. He carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed the badge on his chest settled every disagreement before it even began. His sharp blue eyes drifted across the courtroom, scanning faces without much interest. Until they landed on Maya. Only for a moment. Long enough to form an opinion. Long enough to place her inside a story he had already written in his own mind. Maya noticed the glance but returned her attention to the folder resting in her hands. Years in the Marine Corps had taught her an invaluable lesson. Not every challenge deserved an immediate response. Sometimes silence revealed far more about another person than words ever could. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the distant horizon. Inside, the courtroom remained calm. For now. Maya rested both hands on the leather folder and listened as the quiet rhythm of the courtroom unfolded around her. Pages turned. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed near the back row. Every sound blended into the familiar atmosphere of institutions built on rules, procedure, and authority. It reminded her of military tribunals she had attended years before, where every word carried weight and every decision could alter someone's future. She never imagined that this courtroom would soon test something far more personal than discipline. Few people would have guessed that the calm woman sitting alone had spent nearly 15 years in the United States Marine Corps. She had graduated near the top of her class, survived deployments that pushed both her body and her mind beyond ordinary limits, and earned the respect of commanders who believed leadership was measured not by rank, but by character. Her greatest lesson had never come from combat. It had come from her first commanding officer. Control is your greatest weapon, he used to tell every young Marine. Anyone can lose their temper. Very few can master it. Those words had stayed with Maya long after the uniform became part of her identity. She had repeated them during exhausting field exercises. She had remembered them during dangerous overseas operations. She remembered them now. As another attorney walked past her row, Maya quietly glanced at the framed American flag hanging behind the judge's bench. For a brief moment, memories surfaced with surprising clarity. She saw younger recruits standing beneath the scorching summer sun at Paris Island. She remembered endless hours of physical training, blistered hands gripping obstacle course ropes, instructors demanding perfection with voices that echoed across the parade grounds. The Marine Corps had taught her how to fight. It had spent even more time teaching her when not to. That difference separated professionals from people driven only by emotion. Across the courtroom, Officer Daniel Brooks continued speaking with another deputy. Although their conversation was too distant to hear clearly, Maya noticed occasional glances directed toward various spectators entering the room. His confident smile suggested a man completely comfortable inside these walls. He belonged here. At least, that was what he believed. A court clerk stepped forward and politely addressed the waiting audience. Ladies and gentlemen, the hearing will begin shortly. Please silence all electronic devices. The scattered conversations faded almost instantly. Maya reached into her blazer and switched off her phone before sliding it back into her pocket. As she did, a folded photograph slipped from between the pages of her folder. She caught it before it reached the floor. It showed her standing beside several Marines after returning from deployment. Their uniforms were dusty, their faces exhausted, yet every smile reflected something deeper than victory. It reflected trust. She looked at the picture for only a second before placing it carefully back inside the folder. Some battles ended overseas. Others waited quietly at home. Outside the courtroom windows, rain finally began tapping softly against the glass, each drop adding another layer to the heavy silence filling the room. The judge's entrance was only moments away. Officer Brooks adjusted the badge on his chest and walked toward the center aisle, his polished boot striking the marble floor with slow, confident steps. For the first time that morning, his path and Maya's would cross. Neither of them realized that within the next few minutes, one decision would transform an ordinary court hearing into a case that people would be talking about long after the courtroom doors had closed. Officer Daniel Brooks had spent nearly 12 years wearing a badge, and somewhere along the way, confidence had quietly transformed into certainty. Not certainty in the law. Certainty in his own judgment. He believed he could read people within seconds. Their clothes. Their posture. The way they spoke. The neighborhood they came from. Every glance became another piece of evidence supporting conclusions he had already decided were true. Most days, no one challenged those conclusions. This morning felt no different. As the courtroom settled into silence, Brooks walked slowly along the center aisle, acknowledging familiar attorneys with casual nods. A clerk smiled politely as he passed. Another deputy joked about the weather outside. Brooks laughed, adjusting the cuffs of his uniform with practiced ease. Then his eyes found Maya again. She remained seated near the back, quietly reviewing the documents inside her folder. Alone. Composed. Almost invisible. Brooks frowned slightly. Ma'am. His voice carried farther than necessary. Several heads turned. Maya looked up, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "Yes, officer. I'll need to see your identification again." There was nothing unusual about the request itself. It was the tone. The assumption. The implication that she somehow did not belong. Without displaying irritation, Maya reached into her blazer and handed him her identification card. "Thank you." Brooks barely glanced at it before asking another question. "What business do you have in this courtroom?" "I've been called to testify." "On whose behalf?" "The court." Her answers remained short. Calm. Respectful. Exactly as she had been trained to respond under pressure. For reasons he could not quite explain, her composure irritated him. People who had something to hide often became nervous. People who had nothing to hide usually became defensive when questioned. She did neither. Instead, she simply waited. The silence seemed to challenge him more than any argument could have. Brooks looked over the folder resting on her lap. "Mind opening that?" Maya paused for only a moment. "The documents are sealed until requested by the judge." "I didn't ask what they were." His voice grew firmer. "I asked you to open it." Nearby, a courtroom clerk glanced toward them before quickly returning to her paperwork. An older attorney looked up from his notes, sensing the conversation growing uncomfortable. Maya slowly stood, keeping both hands visible. "I intend to comply with every lawful instruction given by the court." She spoke evenly. But those records were provided under court order. There was no defiance in her words. Only precision. Brooks took a half-step closer. To him, her measured responses no longer sounded cooperative. They sounded calculated. Behind him, another deputy quietly said, "Dan, we've only got a few minutes before the judge comes in." Brooks didn't answer. His attention never left Maya. Rain continued striking the courthouse windows in slow, steady rhythms. The room seemed smaller now. Conversations faded. Even those pretending not to watch had begun listening. Maya noticed the change immediately. She had stood in enough tense situations to recognize the moment an ordinary interaction became something else. Her breathing remained steady. Her shoulders relaxed. Her hand stayed away from the folder. She refused to give anyone a reason to mistake self-control for resistance. Across the room, the courtroom doors opened. The bailiff entered carrying several case files. He looked toward Brooks, then toward Maya, sensing the unusual tension hanging between them. For a brief second, it appeared the interruption might end the exchange. Instead, Brooks took one final step forward. His expression hardened. Whatever assumption he had formed the moment he first saw Maya had now become conviction. And convictions, once embraced without evidence, often become the beginning of injustice. The courtroom doors closed with a muted thud. Almost instantly, every conversation disappeared. The bailiff took his position near the bench while the court clerk organized the final stack of case files. Outside, rain streaked across the tall windows, turning the bright morning into a gray wash of reflected light. The room felt smaller now, as though every person inside sensed that something had shifted, even if no one could explain why. Officer Daniel Brooks remained standing in front of Maya Carter. He had already examined her identification twice. He had already questioned why she was there. Yet he showed no sign of stepping away. Instead, he folded his arms. "You expect me to believe you're here as a witness?" Maya answered with the same measured calm she had shown from the moment she entered the building. "You don't have to believe me, officer." Her voice remained steady. "The court records will answer that." For a brief second, Brooks said nothing. Something about her composure unsettled him. He was accustomed to arguments. He expected raised voices. Excuses. Frustration. Instead, he found himself facing someone who refused to surrender her dignity simply because she was being challenged. An elderly attorney seated in the front row quietly looked over his glasses. Another spectator lowered her newspaper. Even the young clerk behind the counsel table paused in the middle of arranging documents. The exchange had become impossible to ignore. "Officer Brooks." The bailiff spoke carefully, his tone professional. "We should prepare for the judge." Brooks barely acknowledged him. "I'll finish this first." The words hung heavily in the room. Maya noticed several people watching now. She could almost feel their uncertainty. Some wondered whether she had done something wrong. Others wondered why the questioning had continued long after it should have ended. She resisted the temptation to explain herself. Years of military service had taught her that character often revealed itself most clearly under pressure. She kept both hands visible. She stood with relaxed shoulders. Her eyes never left Brooks, but there was no anger in them. Only patience. Brooks took another slow step closer. "Open the folder. The documents are sealed under the court's instructions." "I'm giving you a direct order." Maya answered without changing her tone. "With respect, officer, the presiding judge is the proper authority to authorize access." A ripple of uneasy silence spread across the courtroom. The response was respectful. Legally precise. Impossible to mistake as hostility. Yet Brooks interpreted it as defiance. His jaw tightened. Across the room, one of the deputy clerks quietly whispered to a colleague, "This isn't going anywhere good." The colleague nodded without replying. No one moved. No one interrupted. Everyone seemed to be waiting for someone with greater authority to walk through the courtroom doors. The clock above the judge's bench ticked forward. 1 second. Then another. Maya drew a slow breath. She reminded herself of the lesson she had carried through every deployment, every training exercise, and every difficult assignment. Control was not weakness. Control was strength. Outside, thunder rolled once more. Inside, the tension became almost tangible. Officer Brooks reached toward the folder as though intending to seize it himself. Before he could touch it, a firm voice echoed across the courtroom. "Officer Brooks." Every head turned toward the entrance. The judge had arrived. And within moments, the confrontation would no longer belong to two people alone. It would unfold under the scrutiny of the entire court, where every word, every action, and every decision could become part of the official record. Ironically, the moment everyone expected an explosion became the moment that revealed the greatest discipline in the room. The judge stepped through the side entrance, robes flowing as the bailiff announced, "All rise." Every person in the courtroom stood. Every person except Officer Daniel Brooks, whose attention remained fixed on Maya Carter. The judge paused. "Officer Brooks." His voice was calm but unmistakably firm. "Take your seat." For the first time that morning, Brooks hesitated. He stepped back from Maya, though the frustration on his face remained impossible to hide. The courtroom settled once more as the judge took the bench, scanning the room with the practiced awareness of someone who had spent decades recognizing tension before it became conflict. "I understand there was a disagreement before proceedings began." No one answered immediately. Silence filled the room. Then the judge looked toward Maya. "Ma'am, are you prepared to testify?" "Yes, Your Honor." Her answer came without hesitation. No complaint. No accusation. No attempt to draw sympathy. The judge nodded before turning toward Brooks. "And Officer Brooks?" "I'm simply performing my duties, Your Honor." His response sounded confident, yet several people in the gallery exchanged uncertain glances. They had witnessed enough of the conversation to know the situation had gone well beyond a routine security check. The judge rested both hands on the bench. "Very well. Then we'll proceed according to procedure." Those words seemed simple. To Maya, they meant everything. Procedure protected everyone equally. Or at least, it was supposed to. The clerk called the first matter before the court. Papers were distributed. Attorneys approached their tables. The courtroom gradually returned to its formal rhythm, but the earlier confrontation lingered beneath the surface like distant thunder that refused to disappear. Maya walked calmly toward the witness stand when her name was called. Each step echoed across the polished floor. She placed one hand on the Bible and took the oath without looking toward Brooks. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." There was quiet strength in her voice. Not the strength of intimidation. The strength of conviction. As she settled into the witness chair, Brooks watched from across the courtroom. His earlier certainty had begun to erode, replaced by something he had not expected. Doubt. The prosecuting attorney approached with a respectful nod. "Ms. Carter, would you please state your full name for the record?" "Maya Elise Carter." "And your occupation?" For the first time that morning, Maya answered with complete precision. "I serve as a captain in the United States Marine Corps." The words landed softly. Yet their effect spread through the courtroom almost instantly. Pens stopped moving. A reporter slowly lowered her notebook. The elderly attorney in the front row lifted his head. Even Brooks blinked. No dramatic music. No raised voices. Just a single truthful sentence that quietly changed how everyone in the room understood the woman they had been watching. The judge glanced down at the case file before looking back at Maya. "I see." It was all he said. But in that brief response, the atmosphere shifted. Not because her title made her more valuable than anyone else. Because the court had finally begun replacing assumptions with facts. And in every courtroom worthy of the name, facts, not first impressions, are where justice begins. Truth has a remarkable way of changing a room without raising its voice. The prosecuting attorney allowed a brief silence to settle before asking the next question. "Captain Carter, how long have you served in the United States Marine Corps?" 14 years. "And your current assignment?" "I serve as a combat leadership instructor and advisor. My duties include preparing Marines to make sound decisions under pressure and to follow the law of armed conflict." Another quiet pause. No one in the courtroom seemed interested in their notes anymore. They were watching her. Not because she had demanded attention. Because every answer she gave dismantled an assumption someone had made before she ever spoke. The attorney continued. "Have you received any commendations during your service?" "I have." "Without discussing classified operations, could you identify them for the record?" Maya answered without pride or false modesty. "I've received the Bronze Star, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, and several campaign awards." The attorney nodded. "Thank you, Captain." From the defense table, even opposing counsel remained silent for a moment. Across the courtroom, Officer Daniel Brooks looked down at the copy of Maya's witness information that had finally been placed before him. He turned the first page. Then another. Every line confirmed what he had dismissed only minutes earlier. Verified military credentials. Official travel authorization. Court-issued witness summons. Nothing about her presence had ever been questionable. Only his assumptions had been. The judge noticed the change in Brooks's expression. "Officer, have you now reviewed the witness file?" Brooks cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor." "And does the file indicate that Captain Carter was lawfully summoned by this court?" A longer pause followed. "It does." The judge simply nodded. There was no lecture. No dramatic rebuke. The record itself had answered the question. Near the back row, one reporter quietly whispered to another, "That changes everything." Her colleague replied just as softly. "No." He glanced toward Maya before continuing. "It changes how everyone was looking at her." The distinction mattered. Maya had not changed. The facts had not changed. Only perception had. The prosecutor resumed questioning. "Captain Carter, why did you agree to appear today?" She looked toward the judge before answering. Because public trust depends on the truth. Her words carried no rehearsed emotion. They deserve complete facts, regardless of who those facts support. The courtroom remained completely still. She had not come to defend one side. She had not come to accuse another. She had come because the legal process required honest testimony, and she believed institutions remained strongest when people respected them enough to tell the truth. The judge leaned back slightly. "Captain Carter, the court appreciates your cooperation." "Thank you, Your Honor." Officer Brooks lowered the witness file onto counsel's table. For the first time that morning, he replayed every question he had asked her. Every conclusion he had reached. Every opportunity he had ignored to pause and verify before judging. The badge on his chest had not changed. Neither had the uniform he wore. Yet somehow, it felt heavier than it had an hour earlier. Because authority carries responsibility. And responsibility begins with the willingness to question your own certainty before questioning someone else's character. Evidence does not carry emotion. It does not choose sides. It simply waits for someone willing to see it. Judge Eleanor Whitmore adjusted her glasses and looked toward the clerk. "Counsel, you may proceed." The prosecutor rose from the table carrying a thin folder marked with the court's exhibit number. "Your Honor, before questioning continues, the state requests permission to introduce the courthouse security footage and the entry log from this morning." "Any objection?" Defense counsel slowly shook his head. "No objection." Admitted. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as a monitor position beside the witness stand came to life. No dramatic music accompanied the recording. Only silent black and white images stamped with precise times. 8:14 a.m. Maya Carter entered through the courthouse doors. She paused for the security screening. She presented her identification without hesitation. She thanked the security officer before continuing toward courtroom 3. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. The next clip appeared. 8:27 a.m. Officer Daniel Brooks approached Maya near the back row. The footage contained no audio, yet every movement spoke clearly. He requested her identification. She handed it over immediately. He returned it. Then questioned her again. And again. The recording continued. Each request from Brooks became more insistent. Each response from Maya remained calm. Hands visible. No sudden movements. No attempt to leave. No resistance. A quiet murmur spread across the gallery. The prosecutor allowed the video to play uninterrupted. Facts required patience. The final clip ended with the arrival of Judge Whitmore through the side entrance, stopping the exchange before it escalated further. The screen faded to black. The courtroom lights brightened. The prosecutor turned toward the witness stand. "Captain Carter, is this recording an accurate representation of what occurred this morning?" "It is." He nodded before facing the judge. "The state also submits the courthouse access records." The clerk distributed copies. Each page confirmed the same sequence. Captain Maya Carter had been officially registered as a court witness 3 weeks earlier. Her credentials had been verified before she entered the building. Her authorization remained active throughout the morning. Every document matched. Every timestamp aligned. The judge carefully reviewed the paperwork before placing it neatly on the bench. "Officer Brooks." "Yes, Your Honor." "Can you identify anything in these exhibits that suggests Captain Carter failed to comply with lawful instructions?" Brooks remained silent for several seconds. The silence itself became an answer. Finally, he spoke. "No, Your Honor." The judge gave a small, measured nod. "Very well." There was no satisfaction in her expression. Only responsibility. She had spent decades on the bench understanding that courts were not places for humiliation. They were places where assumptions surrendered to evidence. In the gallery, Several spectators exchanged thoughtful glances. Earlier that morning, many had quietly wondered whether Maya belonged in the courtroom. Now they found themselves asking a different question. How easily had they accepted someone else's first impression? Maya remained exactly as she had been from the beginning. Calm. Respectful. Patient. The evidence had not transformed her. It had simply revealed the truth that had been present all along. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. Thin rays of sunlight pushed through the clouds, casting pale bands of light across the courtroom floor. Inside, the atmosphere had changed just as quietly. Not because one person had defeated another. Because facts had accomplished what emotion never could. They had reminded everyone present that justice does not begin with certainty. It begins with the courage to replace assumptions with truth. Ironically, nothing extraordinary happened after the evidence was presented. No dramatic confession echoed through the courtroom. No applause broke the silence. No one celebrated. Justice rarely announces itself with noise. Instead, it arrives in quiet moments when truth finally has enough room to breathe. Judge Eleanor Whitmore carefully closed the case file before looking across the courtroom one final time. This court has heard the testimony, reviewed the admitted evidence, and considered the record. Her voice remained measured. The record reflects that Captain Maya Carter fully complied with courthouse procedures and appeared before this court under lawful authorization. She paused briefly. It also reminds every person entrusted with public authority that responsibility begins with verification, not assumption. The words were directed to no one in particular. Yet everyone understood their meaning. Officer Daniel Brooks remained standing beside the defense table. His shoulders looked different now. Not weaker. Simply heavier. For the first time that morning, the confidence that had filled every step seemed replaced by reflection. The judge continued. The appropriate administrative review of today's events will proceed through the established process. Nothing more. Nothing less. That was how institutions preserved integrity. Not through anger. Through accountability. As the hearing concluded, attorneys quietly gathered their files. The spectators slowly rose from the wooden benches. Reporters closed their notebooks, realizing the story they had expected to write had changed completely. It was never about a confrontation. It was about perception. Several people walked past Maya as she organized the documents inside her leather folder. An elderly veteran paused beside her. He did not ask about her medals. He did not mention her rank. Instead, he simply offered a respectful nod. Thank you. For your service. Maya returned the gesture with a gentle smile. Thank you. Nothing more needed to be said. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped entirely. Sunlight reflected across the wet stone steps, turning countless drops of water into small flashes of light. People exited the building one by one, disappearing into the ordinary rhythm of the city. Officer Brooks stepped outside several moments later. He stopped near the entrance and looked back toward the courthouse doors. Inside those walls, the law had not changed. Neither had the evidence. The only thing that had truly changed was his understanding of how quickly certainty could become prejudice when facts were ignored. Across the plaza, Maya walked toward her car without looking back. She carried no sense of victory. Only quiet purpose. She had not come to defeat anyone. She had come to fulfill a duty she had accepted long before entering that courtroom. Some duties belong to soldiers. Others belong to citizens. The strongest institutions depend upon both. As the courthouse doors slowly closed behind the last visitors, the building returned to silence, ready for another day, another hearing, another opportunity to choose evidence over assumption. Because a badge can command authority. A uniform can command respect. But neither can replace character. And in the end, justice is remembered not for the people who spoke the loudest, but for those who allowed the truth to speak for itself. The courtroom had been built to protect justice. That day, justice was protected by patience, dignity, and the courage to let facts stand where prejudice once tried to stand.